In this country, the ocean is at the front door, at the back door, and it is slowly moving inside. But sea level rise is only the latest chapter. To understand this remote island life, we have to ask how the Marshall Islands survives with no rivers, how food crosses an endless sea, and why an unresolved nuclear legacy still haunts them. And most importantly, why, when the water is rising, the people of this Pacific island nation refuse to leave the land of their mothers. To understand this place, you first have to grasp the sheer scale of the Pacific. When you fly here, for hours, the view outside the window is nothing but a terrifyingly vast expanse of deep blue. Just as you begin to doubt if land exists at all, a fragile thread of green emerges. This is Majuro Atoll, the capital. As the plane descends, the runway feels so precariously narrow that it seems as though you are landing directly on the ocean. This is not a solid landmass. The country consists of 29 coral atolls and 5 main islands, shattering into more than 1,200 tiny islets. They are scattered across a seemingly infinite ocean, historically divided into 2 parallel chains, Ratak, meaning where the sun rises, and Ralik, where the sun sets. Figuring out how to reach the Marshall Islands is a logistical puzzle. International flight connections are incredibly limited, but arriving in Majuro is only the beginning. If you want to experience the true remote Pacific Islands, journeying to the outer atolls is a different reality altogether. Here, Marshall Islands travel does not mean following a predictable tourist map. There is no standard public transportation. A domestic flight or a supply boat leaving port depends entirely on cargo schedules, the mercy of the weather, and the temperament of the sea. Remoteness here is not a tourism slogan. It is a physical barrier. It is the unforgiving distance that every single person, every pill of medicine, and every bag of rice must cross. But the most staggering realization does not come from the journey. The shocking truth isn't how difficult it is to get here. It is that once your feet touch the ground, you realize this entire country has almost nowhere to step back from the sea. Drive along the narrow road of Majuro Atoll, and the reality of this geography immediately sets in. Look out one window, and you see the tranquil, turquoise surface of the lagoon. Turn your head to the other side, and the untamed Pacific Ocean is violently crashing against the shore. Just by shifting your gaze, you witness 2 entirely different worlds, pressing in on a single thread of land. To understand how people can live here, we must look beneath the surface. Millions of years ago, massive volcanic peaks pierced the ocean. Over time, living coral grew around their sunlit slopes. As the ancient volcanoes slowly sank back into the abyss, the coral kept reaching for the light, leaving behind a circular reef, a coral atoll. Over centuries, ocean waves and wind crushed the dead coral into white sand, pushing it upward to form these razor-thin strips of earth. But this breathtaking origin story is also their greatest vulnerability. There are no high mountains to climb. There is no inland to evacuate to. The ground they walk on is nothing more than porous coral sand. The living reef offshore is their absolute first line of defense against the vast water. Because most of the country sits just a couple of meters above the waves, the immediate danger isn't just the physical sinking of the islands. Long before they are fully submerged, the World Bank warns that wave-driven flooding, coastal erosion, and saltwater intrusion will critically threaten their survival. Sea level rise and the broader impacts of climate change in the Marshall Islands mean the ocean is already claiming the land from below. The most terrifying thing is not that the sea is on both sides. It is that there is no inside for people to retreat to. Yet, on these fragile strips of sand with no rivers and no natural lakes, a crisis even more immediate than vanishing land emerges, the moment the sky stops raining. When there are no rivers to draw from, water scarcity is not just an environmental concept, it dictates the daily rhythm of life in the Marshall Islands. For a local family, every 24 hours is a meticulously calculated diary of survival. Morning begins not with brewing a casual pot of coffee, but with a careful extraction from the catchment tank to cook rice. Before the children leave for school, their water bottles are filled, a precious, non-negotiable daily ration. By afternoon, if the reserve tank drops too low, daily chores come to a halt. Laundry is postponed. Bathing becomes a two-step ritual, a plunge into the salty ocean to wash away the day's sweat, followed by a fleeting, strictly measured rinse with fresh water. And then, the sky darkens. The first drops of a tropical downpour trigger an immediate household choreography. Tank lids are thrown open and gutters are inspected. The sound of rain here is not weather. It is the sound of absolute relief. In many countries, rain slows down a workday. In the Marshall Islands, rain can dictate how a family lives for the next several weeks. Nature has provided one hidden reservoir, though it is incredibly fragile. As rainwater seeps through the porous coral sand, it gathers underground. Because fresh water is less dense, it literally floats directly above the heavier subterranean saltwater, creating what is known as a freshwater lens. But this natural bubble is under constant siege. A single king tide or a prolonged drought can instantly contaminate this vital source with salt. To survive, human engineering has to match the scale of the crisis. At the international airport in Majuro, the massive paved runway serves a highly unusual dual purpose. It is engineered as a giant rainwater harvesting system, channeling millions of gallons into municipal storage to supplement the fragile freshwater lens at the far end of the atoll. The arrival of a cargo ship at Majuro port is the fragile heartbeat of this isolated nation. As heavy cranes swing into action, they unload the literal lifelines of the atolls. Inside these steel boxes is everything required to sustain a society in the middle of nowhere: sacks of white rice, industrial fuel, vital medicine, construction materials, bottled water, frozen goods, and everyday appliances. If you track a single can of meat from the shadowy hull of the ship to a brightly lit local grocery shelf, you begin to grasp the crushing reality of the Marshall Islands' cost of living. By the time any product reaches a consumer, it carries the hidden weight of 1,000 invisible taxes. The final price tag is brutally inflated by vast oceanic shipping distances, the expensive diesel required for cold storage, the low frequency of vessels, and the high risks of delayed delivery to a microscopic market. You are not merely purchasing a commodity, you are paying for the thousands of miles of ocean it had to cross. This logistical bottleneck has forced a jarring culinary divide, where two entirely different diets exist side by side. For centuries, the foundation of Marshallese traditional food relied on an intimate knowledge of what the sea and nutrient-poor coral soil could yield. Generations mastered resilient crops like breadfruit and coconut, pandanus, and swamp taro, paired perfectly with the ocean's fresh catch. It is the definitive Pacific Island food. Yet, step into a kitchen today, and the cupboards tell a different story, dominated by the convenience of imported food, instant noodles, highly processed canned meats, and sugary drinks. This dietary shift has triggered a profound public health crisis. Based on a 2018 survey highlighted by the World Health Organization, the population suffers from a heavy dependence on these energy-dense, nutrient-poor imports. The nation battles severe rates of diabetes, a terrifying prospect when emergency medical care on the outer islands remains agonizingly out of reach. A nation entirely surrounded by fish can still depend on canned food. That is not a paradox of taste, but a brutal consequence of transport, time, and an economy with too little land to produce. But out there, beyond Majuro, where supply ships arrive far less frequently, cash is sometimes no longer the only thing that dictates how a family survives. To truly understand the Marshallese people, you have to witness the contrast of a single day across two different worlds. In Majuro, vehicles roll down the paved road, shipping containers are unloaded, shop doors swing open, and digital networks connect residents to the global pulse. But leave the capital, and you enter a remote island community, where the rhythm of outer island life operates on a completely different frequency. Here, a family simply waits for a supply ship that has no guaranteed time of arrival. In these distant atolls, survival is heavily anchored by the copra economy. Copra, dried coconut meat, is not merely an agricultural export. It is the physical currency of sweat and endurance. You can hear the heavy thud of machetes, the meticulous labor of extracting the flesh, and the patient wait as it bakes under the blazing sun. When the heavy sacks are finally packed, this grueling physical labor is traded for the ultimate lifelines: bags of rice, cooking oil, generator fuel, and basic medicine. But what happens when the ship is delayed? When weeks pass and the horizon remains stubbornly empty, the island quietly shifts gears. Families turn back to the lagoon for their immediate protein. Imported reserves are strictly rationed. Generator fuel is conserved, leaving evenings wrapped in natural darkness. The community instinctively reverts to a state of profound self-sufficiency. Out here, you do not schedule your day. The environment schedules it for you. When the tide rolls in, the wooden fishing boats head out. When the water recedes, exposing the reef, it is time to gather shells and mend the nets. If the rain falls, every hand rushes to harvest water. And when the sun blazes, the pandanus leaves are woven and the copra is dried. In Majuro, people look at their watches, but on many outer islands, what matters far more is the exact color of the sky, the level of the tide, and whether a ship has finally pierced the horizon. Yet, long before steel cargo ships, airplanes, or satellite GPS ever existed, the Marshallese navigated this immense ocean, connecting these tiny dots of land, using a profound system that outsiders could barely even see. For thousands of years, the ocean was never an empty void to the islanders. To cross it, they created something entirely unique: the Marshallese stick charts. Unlike Western maps that plot solid landmasses, these intricate grids of curved roots and coconut fronds map the invisible behavior of the water itself. Small cowrie shells mark the locations of the atolls, while the intersecting sticks represent ocean swells, wave refraction, and currents. As noted by the Smithsonian, these were highly personalized teaching tools, sometimes fully understood only by the master navigator who crafted them. But perhaps the most astonishing fact about these charts is that they were never taken to sea. The map was studied on land and memorized entirely in the mind. Out on the vast expanse of the Pacific, traditional Pacific navigation relied on a profound sensory connection. Master navigators read the stars, the flight paths of seabirds, and the direction of the wind. Certain maritime traditions here emphasize feeling the very motion of the waves through the hull of the canoe, using their entire body to detect the subtle echo of a swell striking a distant reef. Questions upon this ancient tradition. If the shoreline steadily erodes, what does inheritance actually mean? When a young person migrates thousands of miles away, how do they fulfill their obligations to their clan's vanishing plot? If an atoll ultimately becomes uninhabitable, how will the legal and spiritual ties to the earth be maintained without the earth itself? In a society where land is passed down through the memories of mothers, losing the land is not just losing real estate, it can mean losing a piece of the family structure itself. But on some Marshall Islands, the people did not have to wait for the rising sea to take their homes. In the last century, they were asked to leave by a force that came from the outside. Before the world knew its name as a synonym for devastation, Bikini Atoll was simply a sanctuary of life. It was a place where slender wooden canoes quietly glided across a pristine lagoon at dawn. Fishermen cast their nets, men harvested coconuts beneath the swaying fronds, and a deeply rooted community lived in harmony with the ancestral land that had sustained their families for countless generations. In 1946, that quiet existence came to an abrupt end. The residents were asked to leave their homes, relocated by the US military to serve a testing program framed as being for the good of mankind. They boarded naval ships with the solemn promise that their departure was temporary. But that safe return never happened. Because of lasting radiological contamination, Bikini remains devoid of a permanent resident population to this day. From 1946 to 1958, this remote paradise became the primary proving ground for United States nuclear testing. 67 nuclear devices were detonated here. The peak of this era occurred on March 1, 1954, with Castle Bravo. Yielding approximately 15 megatons, it remains the most powerful nuclear weapon ever tested by the United States. When the blinding flash faded, the radioactive fallout drifted across the Pacific, falling like a deadly white snow onto inhabited neighboring islands. The human consequences were immediate and enduring. Islanders suffered from severe radiation burns and a surge in thyroid illnesses. Beyond the immediate physical pain, it meant the agonizing loss of their primary lifelines, the sudden inability to safely live on or harvest food from their poisoned soil. The emotional scars run even deeper. In the harrowing testimonies of some Marshallese women, they spoke of jellyfish babies, a heartbreaking phrase they used to describe the tragic pregnancies that ended with profound, fatal abnormalities. It is a trauma of displacement, where debates over consent, medical surveillance, and adequate compensation continue to echo through the courts. The physical embodiment of this unresolved past lies beneath the massive concrete shell of the Runit Dome. Inside this unlined blast crater sits irradiated soil and debris, capped by concrete. Access to Runit Island remains strictly limited. For many locals, the dome is a source of profound dread, sparking fears of toxic leakage as the ocean relentlessly rises. Yet, a 2024 US Department of Energy assessment presents a different perspective. While acknowledging that sea level rise and storm surges could mobilize radioactive materials, their models do not predict a significant increase in health risks for the residents of inhabited atolls, even in the event of a dome failure. It is a complex reality where deep-seated local anxieties stand face-to-face with official conclusions. What makes Bikini different from a historical ruin is that the story is not closed. The landscape is quiet, but the right to return, safety, and responsibility are still being fiercely debated. And this nuclear legacy in the Pacific does not merely exist on abandoned islands. It is actively present in the economic and military relationships shaping Marshallese life today. To see the living legacy of these historical and economic forces, you only need to look at Ebai Island. Covering a minuscule fraction of land, it is home to roughly 10,000 people, making it one of the most densely populated communities in the Pacific. From above, the island is a tightly packed mosaic of tin roofs. Homes stand shoulder to shoulder, leaving almost no open room for personal gardens, medical facilities, or infrastructure expansion. The daily pressure on basic necessities, food, clean water, and sanitation, is immense. Yet, right across the exact same lagoon, lies Kwajalein Atoll, a heavily restricted United States missile and surveillance base of immense strategic value in Pacific geopolitics. Every morning, a ferry carries Marshallese workers from the crowded alleys of Ebeye across the water to work on the installation. They step onto an island defined by modern infrastructure, manicured spaces, and well-maintained facilities. It is a striking juxtaposition, two entirely different conditions of living, coexisting just a short boat ride apart. This contrast is perhaps most visible at the dinner table. Back in a crowded home on Ebeye, a large family might gather around a meal centered on imported white rice, canned meat, or local catch, with fresh vegetables being a rare or highly expensive luxury. Meanwhile, the military base is sustained by advanced cold chain logistics, securing a diverse, steady supply of fresh produce. It is a quiet, visual representation of a deep economic divide. This profound economic and strategic relationship is formalized through the Compact of Free Association. Under this agreement, the United States provides vital financial assistance and maintains its defensive presence. In return, Marshallese citizens are granted the unique right to enter, reside, and work legally in the United States without a visa. For many families seeking better education, healthcare, and stable jobs, this treaty is an invaluable lifeline, but it is also a powerful catalyst for outward Marshallese migration. The physical distance between Ebeye and the base is remarkably short, but the disparity in infrastructure, food, and opportunity makes that stretch of water feel wider than an ocean. When the youth can legally leave to find a more secure life abroad, the Marshall Islands begins to face a crisis that no seawall can ever solve. Who will be left to stay? The reality of climate change in the Marshall Islands is often misunderstood. An island does not need to vanish entirely beneath the waves to lose its ability to sustain life. Today, king tides routinely spill across the main roads. Relentless waves damage coastal homes, and saltwater breaches the fragile wells, slowly poisoning the ancestral breadfruit and coconut trees from the roots up. The World Bank warns that wave-driven flooding and severe saltwater intrusion could render many areas unlivable long before they are permanently submerged. In response, the nation has developed a comprehensive national adaptation plan, uniting communities, women, youth, and churches to fortify their shores. But the financial cost of defending this porous perimeter is growing staggeringly high. Meanwhile, another crisis is piling up on the shore. Consider the journey of a single plastic bottle, manufactured on another continent, shipped thousands of miles to Majuro, utilized for just a few minutes, and then discarded with no easy path for recycling. It inevitably ends up at the local landfill, a towering mound of refuse sitting on a painfully narrow strip of land. Because digging deep into the coral would instantly pollute the groundwater, the garbage must be piled upward. The irony is clear. Imported goods are absolutely essential to sustain daily life, yet their packaging becomes a permanent, toxic burden, one that threatens to wash right back into the lagoon with the next major surge. Caught between rising waters and geographic isolation, many families face a heartbreaking choice. Driven by the pursuit of better healthcare, higher education, and stable employment, younger generations are utilizing their treaty rights to relocate to the United States. They send crucial remittances back home, but their departure leaves a profound void. On several outer atolls, classrooms are quietly emptying. This island migration means that the remaining elders have fewer apprentices to inherit the intricate, time-honored skills of canoe building, pandanus weaving, wave reading, and traditional singing. The culture risks fading, not solely washed away by the ocean, but diminished by absence. Yet, the nation is adapting. The Marshallese diaspora is actively preserving their heritage thousands of miles away. Across America, church halls echo with the Marshallese language, and children born on foreign soil are raised on vivid stories of the coral atolls. The homeland is beginning to exist simultaneously as a physical coordinate and an inherited memory. But this geographic shift raises unprecedented legal questions for the future of Pacific islands. If an atoll becomes completely uninhabitable, does the nation's sovereignty remain intact? How are maritime borders and lucrative fishing rights legally maintained? Can a displaced community continue to be recognized as a sovereign territorial nation? And what does the right of return truly mean if the land to return to is no longer safe? Nuclear testing once forced some communities to abandon their land. Sea level rise threatens to ask the exact same question, this time on the scale of an entire nation. If leaving means losing a vital piece of your identity, and staying means accepting a deeply uncertain future, what makes the Marshallese people continue to choose their homeland? For the Marshallese people, home has never been defined merely by the physical dirt and coral rising above the sea. It is, fundamentally, an intricate and living system of memory. It is the calm lagoon where a child first learns the steady stroke of a paddle. It is the ancestral plot holding the very coconut trees planted by their great-grandparents. It is the precise direction of an ocean swell passed down by a master navigator, and an ancient song that only finds its true resonance when sung among the people who understand its history. There is no need to romanticize the agonizing decision to stay. Today, some choose to remain on these fragile atolls, while others must make the difficult journey to leave. Many now navigate a complex existence, bridging two completely different worlds. There is no single choice that is entirely easy, and no answer that is completely right. However, those who do remain refuse to simply stand as passive victims of a vanishing map. They are fiercely proactive. They are meticulously harvesting the rain, aggressively restoring their coral reefs, and passionately teaching their native language to the young. They are building sailing canoes, fortifying their coastal infrastructure, and relentlessly maintaining the cultural heartbeat of their global diaspora. The shorelines of the Marshall Islands may very well continue to shift and change, but a nation does not survive solely on the square meters of earth it possesses. They exist in what is remembered, what is taught, and what is passed on to the next. But the Marshall Islands is not the only community fighting to protect its identity in absolute isolation. On your screen right now is Tristan da Cunha, the most remote inhabited island in the world, where the ocean dictates an entirely different way of life.